Okay, guys, so we're going to look now at another poem called A Bird Came Down the Walk. It's worth stressing that all of Dickinson's poems are actually untitled, and their titles and their numerical cataloguing come from other people, and the first line of the text itself. What we're thinking here is, again, this poem as a sort of partner poem to a certain slant of light in terms of its engagement with the natural world, in terms of its emphasis on enigmatic perception and actually the limitations of human perception in this piece. But here with an altogether more sublime and positive rendition of the relationship between the sensory perception of the natural world and the natural world itself. Now, it's a slightly more simple poem, particularly in the outset. Dickinson starts with "A bird came down the walk he did not know I saw." Now, the movement of the bird down the walk could function, I think, as a metaphor for gradually unfolding human perception, which is a central theme of the poem. This is a poem about perception itself, trying to pin down the phenomenology of perceiving the natural world and perceiving its sort of enigmatic beauty and trying to embody it in language. And that movement down the walk from distance to proximity, I think, mirrors the movement of mystery to understanding that the poem seems to set up. Actually, I want to go on to show you how it undermines it, actually, and that the human perception is ultimately seen as unstable and, I think, weak in the face of the mystery of nature. The bird enters the domain of humans, though, in this opening line, and it's important that it's in an active role, that nature is quite literally on the front foot in this poem. But there's a sense of dramatic irony about the fact that the bird doesn't know that the speaker is observing them. And so we've got this sense then of a vision of the natural world that is unsullied by human perception or interference. It's unaffected, it's pure nature. And so what we see in the unfolding lines is what sort of the premise is that we've got a full insight into the full reality of the natural world. The first vision is of a violent nature, though. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. So the worm here is reduced to a fraction. It's an angleworm. It's a little piece of one, which emphasizes its loss of life and vitality and actually the cold brutality of the bird. So we've got this very friendly, seemingly innocent opening couplet, and then a sudden transformation into this violent, brutal vision of the natural world, even in an animal that sort of symbolizes, I think, sort of positive experiences, flight and vitality and energy. And he ate the fellow raw. And I think here we've got a sort of reversal of the conventional human-animal relationship, where the bird is the predator of a fellow rather than the fellow being the predator of a bird. And I think the personification of this worm as a fellow obviously is emphasizing the bird's brutality here. The subordinate clause that we've seen, where the meanings are, ate the fellow, raw, emphasizes, I think, the bird's sort of lack of feeling and its brutality, that it's willing to sort of gobble down this animal, and it being emphasized in a clause of its own gives us a heavy emphasis of its rawness, its freshly killed nature. And I think there's a suggestion here of Darwinian biology. Dickinson's upbringing was one of heavy immersion in a scientific curriculum, actually, at Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, where she studied temporarily in her late teens, with a very thorough science curriculum, and she had an active interest in botany and ornithology and the natural world. And we've got a sort of Darwinian vision of nature here that I think is informed by Tennyson's vision of it in his poems, of nature being red in tooth and claw, of the brutal, violent natural world that's red in tooth because aspects of nature have been eating each other and inflicting violence on each other with their claws. So there's this sense there of a brutal, vicious nature. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass. So there's this sudden suggestion here of perhaps a sort of gentlemanly meal and then a sort of post meal drink, a sort of a digestivo of sorts. He's having a dew from a convenient grass, and I think it gives the impression of gentility through this personification that he drinks a dew after a meal from a convenient grass. So there's again this sort of suggestion of humanly gentility, but also I think then a suggestion of absolution, that the bird's previous savagery is being washed away. And then what we then get is the unstable subjective nature of perception, that we're trying here to pin this bird down to a sort of vision, a unifying vision, and even in this opening stanza, it can't be done. It's both brutal and genteel in this transition between 2 or 3 lines. So again, we've got this sudden transformation, I think, suggesting that sense of the instability of human perception of the natural world. And he then hops sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. So again, the personification of this bird emphasizes its now its human politeness and its gentility. It's moving out the way to let a beetle pass. And so you have, again, the sense of this bird being overly polite after having briefly been brutal and violent. But it seems kind of chaotic and indiscriminate to treat such similar animals as a beetle and a worm in such contrasting ways. But I think what we've then got there is actually an indirect concern with the arbitrary nature of our perception of the natural world. This extended personification is actually about the way that we impose our own perceptive frameworks on the natural world. We can't help but personify the natural world and see characters within the behavior of animals. And I think the argument is that it is always beyond our mental apparatus and our sensory apparatus. It doesn't fit those concepts that we use to approach the natural world. And that indiscriminate instability here, through these various types of personification, I think are showing us the way that we overestimate the similarities between our own world and that of the natural. And again, there's another shift here. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad, with a verbal pattern, or it can be called a semantic field, or a lexis of hurried movement, that suggests a kind of frenzied panic. This bird is suddenly terrified. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad. Those verbal choices here give us that sense of panic and anxiety. And the location here, all abroad, that sort of prepositional phrase, shows us that the panic is indiscriminate. It's everywhere. It's not just in one location. It's all of the area that is not the bird. And it's a consequence of fear, which mirrors or anticipates actually the state of the speaker or the onlooker. There's a state of, I think, glancing with rapid eyes and hurrying all abroad as the human perceiver of the scene, but looking at the bird here through the lens of fear, after it has already seemed to be this kind of dominant, aggressive force, and then polite, and then suddenly it's afraid. Those irritable, rapid changes of demeanor and emotional state seem to, I think, suggest the indiscriminate nature of the speaker's perception of the natural world here. And then they look like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head. There's a really heavy emphasis here on the process of perception and on its subjective qualities. So the simile here actually personifies something inanimate, frightened beads, a way of describing a bird's widely opened eyes. But those logical slippages, that you can't have a bead that's frightened unless it's illogically personified, I think foregrounds that sense of the instability of the speaker's perception of what is being perceived. And then that, again, the use of relative clauses here, I thought, emphasizes the subjectivity of vision itself, which is an imposition of the speaker's own emotions on the scene. The speaker's fear is largely the lens through which this vision is being filtered. And so there's a constant sense of human emotions providing the sensory filter for this apperception of nature. He stirred his velvet head, so the bird here is anatomized and reduced to parts, which again I think emphasizes the incomplete nature of this apperception. It's just frightened beads and then a velvet head. It cannot be taken in fully as a whole at once, and so it has to be fragmented down. And again here, I think there's a sort of irony involved in being made from beads and being made from velvet, these sort of materials that are connected to artifice and clothing. You know, we've got this sort of suggestion of a human speaker seeing the bird's appearance through ornamentation and human aesthetics, but actually its nature is something way beyond the things that we use to make sense of our own lives, you know, and the aestheticized appearance of clothes being one of them. This bird that doesn't fit these figurative descriptions, and I think the emphasis on "I thought" here exposes the fact that the speaker is not certain actually about the figures that she or he has used to define the appearance of this bird. It's conditional. Like one endangered cautious, I offered him a crumb. Now, this is a structural pivot in the poem that shifts the focus from nature itself to the instability of perception in a very heavy way. Now, offering him a crumb obviously has a connotation of the sacrament, you know, of Christ's body. But there's a suggestion here of the speaker offering the bird a crumb to sort of conciliate and gives us a sense of the speaker being afraid of the bird. But what it does obviously is captures a sense of the careful movement that you would carry out if you were trying to feed a bird without scaring it off. You would move like one in danger and cautiously. And it's you, ironically, that looks like you're afraid of the bird who you're trying to prevent from flying off in fear. So there's a great irony involved in this, and the uncertainty of this Dickinson exploits. And I think it gives us perhaps a sense then of the fear of the unknowable nature of the natural world, that it can't be fully pinned down in language and sensory perception. Interestingly, Dickinson tried all three of these punctuated versions of this line and settled on the one that I think emphasizes the sense of fear in the speaker the most. If you take a look at A, he stirred his velvet head like one in danger, cautious, full stop. I offered him a crumb. This is separating the action of the speaker from the sense of danger in the simile. He stirred his velvet head like one in danger, cautious. I offered him a crumb. Here, I think just the emphasis through the capitalization here of like one in danger obviously makes it singular, and that it's simply the bird being danger, experiencing the sense of danger. He stirred his velvet head like one in danger, cautious. I offered him a crumb. The starting of this beginning of a new sentence here suggests fully that it's the speaker who is the person fearing the bird and that is experiencing that sense of danger, which I think feeds into this ambiguity that's very carefully constructed here in order to suggest the unstable relationship between humans and the natural world and the sense of instability that this perception carries with it. And the bird, he unrolled his feathers and rode him softer home. Now there's a great sort of proliferating sense of aesthetic beauty in the final parts of this poem. There's a script here, I think, or a canvas, as he flies off and takes flight here, as if the wings of the bird are some form of aesthetic artifact. And there's this unveiling of natural beauty. And then the metaphor of him rowing home, of sailing through the sea, perhaps then as the source of the great unknown. And this home, this destination that the bird is traveling to, perhaps is what remains beyond our ability to grasp or represent through language and sensory perception. So again, there's this suggestion here of the aesthetic beauty of nature, but also of the sort of ineffable mystery of it, that it can't fully be captured in language. And so this poem is one that is simultaneously emphasizing the beauty of the natural world and the power of figurative language, but then also simultaneously its limitations at matching up to the sensory reality of the natural world, the figures that Dickinson relies upon, the figurative language he constructs through this text are sort of indirectly drawing attention to their failure to pin down the experiences in sensory perception. He rode him softer home than oars divide the ocean. So again, the movement is beyond this figurative equivalent, than oars dividing the ocean. So I think here, there's a sense here of gentle action through that verb divide. It's not slap or slice through the waves. It's dividing it gently, as if you're just parting away, almost in a kind of a biblical sense, in the sense of Moses, parting the Red Sea. There's a suggestion here of the bird having a kind of spiritual capacity. And it's 2 silver for a seam. Now, there's something secretive here about the sound, the sibilant alliteration, 2 silver for a seam, that suggests the sort of the secrecy and whispering of the truth of this bird's beauty. But also, it's 2 silver for a seam of coal. So if you think of here, the vision of this bird perhaps as a blackbird, a seam of coal, and actually its appearance is far too silver and too beautiful to be described through that metaphor of being as if it's flying, as if it's a seam of coal, this black bird moving. So again, there's this emphasis on the ethereality and intangible nature of the bird itself. But also, you can imagine the seam almost as if the bird is parting part of the ocean, is leaving its sort of wake, its trail in its wake. And the beauty of this bird is 2 silver to leave that trace, to leave that evidence that it was here. Just like in a certain slant of light, that there's no scar, there's no physical evidence of this mysterious power. There's no seam left in the ocean where it's being divided through this bird's oars, its wings. This description of the bird flying through this extended metaphor, of this nautical extended metaphor, gives us a sense of its fluid movement. But again, it's our creation that we're making sense of this bird through as a lens, and it seems limited. Its movement is 2 silver for a seam. It doesn't. This metaphor doesn't quite capture the enigmatic nature of the bird. Or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. This beautiful pair of lines here at the end captures this sense of intangible beauty. It's intangible, like butterflies leaping off of banks of noon. I think here, in this construction here, we're imagining beams of sunlight, banks of noon, as if the butterflies are stood on the shore of this great ocean of the sky, and that the light moving through it is a sort of sandbank that they can leap off of into the sea of the sky. So the banks of noon here carry out a kind of reification of time. Time itself is made concrete here through the vision of sunlight as sandbanks. And I think, again, there's that effort to embody the intangible, and language fails to do so exactly. Butterflies leaping off these beams of sunlight is being imagined as if they are leaping off, banks of sand into the sea. And again, they leap into the sea, and it's plashless as they swim. Again, there's an alteration of that word. We're expecting splashless, but I think the plashless gives it that slightly less emphatic sibilant sound. Splashless, the triple sibilants within it. Plashless obviously creates this much gentler sound that shows us what, in sound terms, what the poem is trying to describe, as if these butterflies are leaping into this invisible, intangible sea and not leaving any splashes as they swim through the ocean. And so, obviously, there's something oxymoronic about this, that you can leap into the water and be splashless, that captures the mysterious intangibility of nature itself. And as they then go swimming through this ocean, there's a sense of synesthesia, I think, in creating an equivalent, between the air and the sea. And again, that mixture of time and physicality, banks of noon, it's time that's being embodied as a physical concept. And then the air itself is becoming water. So we've got that synesthetic imagery that she's so fond of, that creates that enigmatic sense of intangibility, that we're having to really strain at the logic of language and grammar to create some form of almost worshipful reverence for the beauty of nature as we perceive it through our senses. The final thing that's worth noting about this is that this poem is obviously influenced by the Romantic Sublime, but I think it always insists that nature's sublimity ensures that it's beyond the limits of human perception and consciousness. So it's not some effort to make a claim for gleaning some spiritual insight from our ability to control and tame the natural world through our own metaphorical sense-making apparatus, but actually that human perception is limited in the ability to do so, and that is what communicates nature's sublime power, that we have to strain all of our linguistic resources to somehow capture the enigmatic beauty of the natural world.